The train pulled into Leeds station on a grey February morning in 1946, and Thomas Ashford stepped onto the platform with nothing but a kit bag and 5 years of darkness in his eyes. Around him, other men in D-mob suits moved like ghosts, their faces hollow, their gaits uneven. Some had families waiting, wives crying into their shoulders, children clinging to legs they barely remembered. Thomas scanned the crowd once, twice, then walked through the station alone. Nobody came for him. The tram ride to his neighborhood in Holbeck took 20 minutes. He sat in the back, watching the city pass by. Bombed-out buildings, rubble still piled on corners, women in headscarves queuing outside shops for rationed bread. The war had ended, but Britain looked beaten, exhausted, gray as the sky pressing down on the rooftops. He got off at his stop, walked down Domestic Street where he'd lived his whole life before the war. The terraced houses stood shoulder to shoulder, soot-blackened brick, washing lines strung across narrow yards. Nothing had changed, except everything had. His house was number 17. Thomas stood across the street and stared at it. The door he'd painted blue in '39 was now chipped, peeling. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was home. He crossed the street, raised his hand to knock, then heard laughter inside. A woman's laugh. His wife's laugh. He knew that sound better than his own heartbeat. But then came another voice, deeper, a man's voice, saying something that made her laugh again. Thomas lowered his hand, tried the door. It was unlocked. He stepped into the narrow hallway. The smell hit him first, unfamiliar. Someone else's cigarettes, someone else's sweat. The kitchen door was ajar. He pushed it open. Margaret stood at the stove, her back to him, stirring a pot. She wore a dress she didn't recognize, her hair pinned up the way she used to do it on Sundays. At the table sat a man, thick-necked, in his late 30s, reading a newspaper. He looked up first, his face going slack with confusion, then something else. Fear. "Who the bloody hell are you?" the man said, half rising from his chair. Margaret turned, wooden spoon in hand. Her face went white. The spoon clattered to the floor. "Thomas," she whispered, "you're dead. They said you were dead." "I'm not dead, Maggie," Thomas said quietly. His voice sounded strange even to himself, flat, emptied out. "I'm home." The man stood fully now, puffing his chest. "Now wait a minute, mate. I don't know what you think you're doing here, but—" "This is my house," Thomas said, still quiet. "That's my wife. Who are you?" The man glanced at Margaret. She took a breath, straightened her shoulders. "Thomas, this is Frank. Frank Collier. We thought you were killed at Dunkirk. The telegram came in '40. It said missing, presumed dead. I waited 2 years, but you never came back, never wrote, nothing. I had to move on. Frank and we've been together 3 years now." Thomas looked at Frank Collier. Really looked at him. Soft hands, clean fingernails, no scars, no shadows in his eyes. "You serve?" he asked. Frank shifted his weight. "Reserved occupation, wasn't I? Working munitions. Essential war work." "Munitions," Thomas repeated. "While I was in a stalag eating potato peel soup, you were here shagging my wife and calling it essential?" Frank's face flushed red. "You watch your mouth, mate. I don't care if you were in the war or not." "Get out of my house," Thomas said. Not loud, almost gentle, but something in his tone made Frank stop mid-sentence. Margaret stepped forward. "Thomas, please, this isn't how it looks. We thought you were gone. I mourned you. I wore black for a year. But life goes on. People have to survive. You can't just walk back in after 5 years and expect everything to be the same." "Where did you bury me, then?" Thomas asked. "If you mourned me, where's the grave?" She looked away. "There wasn't a body. They said missing. We had a service at St. Mary's, but no burial. I kept your things, Thomas, upstairs in a box. Your medals, your photos, your dad's watch." "How kind," Thomas said. He turned to Frank. "I'll say it once more. Get out." Frank grabbed his coat from the back of the chair. "I'm not going far, mate. Maggie, I'll be at the pub. Send word when he's cleared off." He pushed past Thomas, shoulder checking him on the way out. The door slammed. Margaret and Thomas stood in the kitchen, the silence thick as smoke. "What happened to the factory?" Thomas asked. Margaret blinked. "What?" "Ashford Metalworks. My dad's factory. I left you with the deeds, the paperwork. What happened to it?" She wet her lips. "I couldn't run it, Thomas. I don't know about metal pressing, about orders and contracts. It was losing money. The bank said they'd repossess. So I sold it." "Sold it to who?" She hesitated. "A man called Bernard Watts. He paid fair price, Thomas. Kept me afloat during the war." "Bernard Watts," Thomas repeated, tasting the name. "Fat Bernard who lived on Cornmill Lane? The one who failed his medical 3 times till they stopped calling him up?" Margaret's voice rose. "He paid me £400. That kept this house, kept me fed. I had no choice. You were dead." "I wasn't dead," Thomas said. "I was in a camp in Poland. I was starving, freezing, watching men die next to me in the bunks. And you were here, selling my inheritance to a coward and warming his bed while he got rich off government contracts I should have had?" Her eyes flashed. "Don't you dare judge me, Thomas Ashford. I waited. I grieved, but I'm not going to apologize for surviving." Thomas picked up his kit bag. "I'm not asking you to apologize, Maggie. I'm just working out what's owed." He walked out of the kitchen, up the stairs to the bedroom, their bedroom. The bed was unmade, 2 pillows with head dents still fresh. He found the box under the bed, pulled it out, opened it. His father's watch, his cap badge, a photo of him and Margaret on their wedding day, 38, both of them young and smiling. He took the watch, left everything else. Downstairs, Margaret stood in the hallway, arms wrapped around herself. "Where will you go?" "Don't know yet," Thomas said, "but I'll be around." He opened the door, stepped out into the cold February air. Behind him, Margaret called out, "Thomas, please, let's talk properly. We can work this out." He didn't turn around. He walked down Domestic Street, past houses full of people who'd survived the war by betraying those who'd fought it. The sky pressed down, heavy and gray. Inside his chest, something cold and methodical began to tick, like a clock counting down. The next morning, Thomas walked to Ashford Metalworks. His father had built the factory in 1922, a small operation pressing steel parts for the motor trade. By 1939, it employed 15 men and turned a steady profit. Now, as Thomas stood across the street, he saw new signage above the gates. Watts Engineering Limited, Est 1943. The yard was busy, men unloading sheet metal, the clang of presses echoing from inside. Thomas watched for an hour, memorizing faces, movements, patterns. Bernard Watts emerged just before noon, exactly as Thomas remembered him, round-faced, well-fed, wearing a suit that cost more than most men earned in a month. He climbed into a black Humber, drove off towards the city center. Thomas followed on foot, keeping distance. Watts parked outside the Queen's Hotel, went inside for lunch. Through the window, Thomas watched him eat roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, laughing with two other men in expensive suits. Reserved occupation, essential war work, growing fat while better men starved. Thomas didn't approach him that day, or the next. He watched, learned. Watts lived in a new-build semi-detached house in Beeston, had a wife and two children, attended Rotary Club meetings on Thursdays, drank at the Gardener's Arms every Friday night. His life ran on rails, predictable, comfortable, built on stolen ground. On the third Friday, Thomas waited outside the pub. Watts left just after 11, walking unsteadily, the drink making him careless. He took a shortcut through an alley that led to the main road. Thomas followed, his boots silent on the wet cobbles. "Bernard," he called out. Watts turned, squinting in the dim light from a street lamp at the alley's end. "Who's that?" "Thomas Ashford," he said, stepping closer. Recognition dawned slowly on Watts's face, followed by nervous laughter. "Bloody hell, Tommy Ashford! Heard you were back. Bit of a shock for everyone. You turning up like Lazarus. How are you, mate?" "How am I?" Thomas repeated. "I'm wondering how you got my factory, Bernard." Watts spread his hands, trying for Jovia. "Business, Tommy. Your missus needed cash. I needed premises. Fair transaction. No hard feelings, eh? War's over now. We all did what we had to." "You did what you had to," Thomas said. "Which was avoid service 3 times while I got captured at Dunkirk." Watts's smile faded. "Now hold on. I had legitimate medical grounds. Flat feet, weak heart. Couldn't help it, could I? Besides, someone had to keep industry running. You should be grateful blokes like me kept the country going while you lot were—" Thomas hit him. Not hard, just enough to drop him to his knees. Watts gasped, clutching his stomach. "Jesus Christ, you mad bastard! I'll have the law on you." "Will you?" Thomas crouched down, spoke quietly. "Go on, then. Tell the coppers Tommy Ashford punched you because you stole his factory while he was in a POW camp. See how much they care." Watts spat blood, glared up at him. "It's legally mine now, mate. Deeds transferred, all proper. You can't touch me." "We'll see," Thomas said. He stood, walked out of the alley, left Watts kneeling on the wet cobbles. But hitting him wasn't enough, not nearly enough. That night, Thomas sat in his boarding house room and thought about the camp, about the men who died there, about what justice meant when the law didn't care. He thought about his father, who'd built that factory with his own hands, who died of a stroke in 37, never knowing his son would lose everything to a coward. And he thought about Maggie, lying in their bed with Frank Collier, laughing while Thomas froze in Poland. By morning, he'd made his decision. The law wouldn't balance the scales, so he would. Bernard Watts's factory had a coal cellar, deep and dark, where fuel was stored for the furnaces. Thomas knew it well, had spent hours down there as a boy when his father ran the place. On Tuesday night, when the factory was locked and empty, Thomas broke in through a ground-floor window he knew didn't latch properly. He moved through the building in darkness, his feet remembering the layout. The cellar door was at the back, near the loading bay. He went down the stone steps, waited in the blackness. Watts came in early Wednesday morning, as he always did, to check the furnaces before the men arrived. Thomas heard him whistling as he unlocked the cellar door, heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs. When Watts reached the bottom, Thomas stepped out of the shadows. "Morning, Bernard." Watts yelped, stumbled backward. "Bloody hell! What are you doing here? This is breaking and entering. I'll have you arrested." "You said that already," Thomas said. "Doesn't seem to be working." Watts backed towards the stairs. "Stay away from me, you nutter!" Thomas didn't rush. He walked forward steadily, and Watts kept backing up, fear making him clumsy. His foot caught on a loose coal sack. He fell backward, hard, his head cracking against the stone edge of the bottom step. The sound was sharp, final. Watts lay still, his eyes open, staring at nothing. Thomas knelt beside him, checked for a pulse. Nothing. He stood, looked down at the body. He felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, just a sense of something corrected, a debt paid. He arranged the scene carefully, moved the coal sack to make the trip look natural, spilled some coal around the body, left the cellar door open. A man came to check the furnaces early, tripped in the dark, hit his head. Accident. By the time the workers arrived at 7, Thomas was back in his boarding house, eating breakfast with the other lodgers. Mrs. Hicks poured tea, asked if he'd slept well. "Like the dead," Thomas said. The police came to the factory mid-morning. Constable Morris, a local bobby Thomas vaguely remembered from before the war, took statements, examined the scene, wrote in his notebook. By afternoon, the word on the street was clear. Bernard Watts, drunk from the night before, came in early, tripped in the cellar, cracked his skull. Tragic accident. No suspicious circumstances. The coroner agreed. Accidental death. The funeral was held the following Monday. Thomas stood at the back of the crowd at the cemetery, watching Watts's wife weep over the coffin, watching his children cling to their mother's skirts. He felt nothing. That evening, he went to the Gardener's Arms, ordered a pint, sat in the corner. The men talked about Watts, about the accident, about bad luck. "Poor sod," one of them said. "Built that business up from nothing during the war. Dead at 42. Thomas sipped his beer, said nothing. Another man, older, with a scar across his cheek, glanced at Thomas. "You're Ashford, aren't you? Heard you were back." "That's right," Thomas said. The scarred man nodded slowly. "That factory was your dad's." "It was," Thomas said. The man raised his glass. "To old man Ashford. Good bloke he was." "To my father," Thomas said. They drank. Nobody mentioned Bernard Watts again that night. Outside, the rain began to fall, washing the streets clean. Thomas walked back to his lodgings, his hand steady, his mind clear. One down. But there were others. Frank Collier, who slept in his bed. The counselor who'd approved the factory sale. All the little cowards who'd grown fat while better men died. He had time. He had patience. And he had nothing left to lose. Frank Collier worked at Hunslet Mill, a textile factory down by the river, operating looms on the day shift. Thomas watched him for a week, learned his routine. Frank left the mill at 6 every evening, walked along the canal towpath to catch a tram on Baum Road. He usually stopped at a chip shop, bought his tea wrapped in newspaper, ate as he walked. He was a creature of habit, like most men. Habits made you predictable. Predictable made you vulnerable. On Friday evening, Thomas waited under the canal bridge, the stone arches dripping with moisture, the water black and slow-moving below. The towpath was quiet at this hour, most workers having already passed through. Frank came whistling along, fish and chips in hand, not a care in the world. He didn't see Thomas until it was too late. Thomas stepped out from the shadows. Frank stopped, recognition dawning, his face going pale. "You, what do you want?" "Just a conversation, Frank," Thomas said. Frank backed up, glanced around. The towpath was empty, the nearest houses 50 yards away across the canal. "Stay away from me, I've done nothing wrong." "You're living in my house," Thomas said, "sleeping with my wife. That feels wrong to me." Frank's voice rose. "She thought you were dead. We both did. You can't blame people for moving on." "I don't blame people," Thomas said, stepping closer. "I blame you." Frank turned to run. Thomas grabbed his collar, yanked him back. Frank swung wildly, his fist glancing off Thomas's shoulder. Thomas didn't feel it. He'd been hit by men much harder than Frank Collier, men with nothing to lose, men fighting for their last scrap of dignity in a frozen camp. Frank's soft punches were nothing. Thomas hit him once in the stomach, doubling him over, then again in the face. Frank went down, blood streaming from his nose. He scrabbled backward on the towpath, shoes slipping on wet stone. "Please, please, mate, I'll leave, I'll go. You can have the house, have Maggie, whatever you want." "It's not what I want anymore," Thomas said. He grabbed Frank by the throat, lifted him half off the ground. Frank's eyes bulged, his hands clawing at Thomas's wrists. "It's about what's owed." Frank's struggles weakened, his face turned purple. Thomas felt the pulse under his thumb, slow, flutter, stop. He let go. Frank's body crumpled onto the towpath. Thomas dragged him to the edge, rolled him into the canal. The splash was muffled, swallowed by the night. The body sank, then floated, face down, drifting slowly with the current. Thomas picked up the dropped fish and chips, threw the greasy newspaper into the canal after Frank. He walked back along the towpath, climbed the steps to street level, caught a tram heading into the city. Nobody noticed him, just another working man heading home after a long day. The body was found 2 days later, snagged on a lock gate near Thwaite Mills. The police pulled Frank Collier out of the water, bloated, pale, canal weeds tangled in his hair. Constable Morris was there again, writing in his notebook, asking questions. "Any sign of foul play?" the sergeant asked. Morris shook his head. "Hard to tell. Could have been drunk, fell in. Could have been robbery, though. His wallet's still on him. Canal's dangerous at night. People fall in all the time." "Mark it down as accidental drowning pending further investigation," the sergeant said. "We'll ask around, see if anyone saw anything, but don't hold your breath. Nobody talks round here." The sergeant was right. Nobody talked. The people of Holbeck and Hunslet knew how to keep their mouths shut, especially when it came to coppers. The police came around, knocked on doors, asked if anyone had seen Frank Collier on Friday night. People shook their heads, closed their doors. "Didn't see nothin', officer." "Wasn't out that night, officer." "Don't know nothin' about it, officer." Margaret came to the boarding house 3 days after Frank's body was found. Mrs. Hicks knocked on Thomas's door, told him he had a visitor. Thomas went downstairs. Margaret stood in the narrow hallway, dressed in black, her face drawn. "Can we talk?" she asked. They walked to the park, sat on a bench overlooking the boating lake. Margaret twisted a handkerchief in her hands. "Frank's dead." "I heard," Thomas said. I'm sorry for your loss." She looked at him sharply. "Are you? Are you really?" "No," Thomas said, "not particularly." Tears welled in her eyes. "The police think he fell in the canal, but I know you, Thomas. I know what you're capable of." "Do you?" Thomas asked. "Because I don't think you do, Maggie. The man you married was soft, kind, wouldn't hurt a fly. That man died in Poland. I'm what came back." She wiped her eyes. "Did you kill him?" Thomas looked out at the lake, watched a pair of ducks glide across the gray water. "If I did, would it matter? Would the police care? Frank Collier, reserved occupation man, found dead in a canal. Just another accident. The chief constable's not going to waste time investigating nobody important." Margaret stood. "You're a monster." "Maybe," Thomas said. "Or maybe I'm just balancing the books." She walked away, her footsteps quick and angry on the gravel path. Thomas stayed on the bench, watching the ducks. He felt calm, purposeful. 2 down. But he wasn't finished yet. There was still Counselor Arthur Webb, the man who'd signed off on the factory sale, who'd rubber-stamped the transfer of Ashford Metalworks to Bernard Watts, despite knowing Thomas was listed as missing, not confirmed dead. Webb had taken a bribe, Thomas was certain. £200 probably, slipped into his pocket to make the paperwork go through fast. Arthur Webb lived in a terrace house on Tempest Road, a respectable address for a respectable man. He was 63, gray-haired, walked with a limp from childhood polio. He attended council meetings twice a month, drank at the Constitutional Club, sang in the church choir on Sundays, a pillar of the community. Thomas followed him for 3 days, noted his patterns. On Tuesday evenings, Webb walked home from the Constitutional Club, always alone, always taking the same route through the back streets to avoid the main road. Old habit, probably from the blackout years. Thomas waited for him in the alley behind the old Methodist chapel. Webb came shuffling along, humming a hymn tune, his walking stick tapping the cobbles. Thomas stepped out. Counselor Webb. Webb stopped, peered at him in the dim light. "Yes, do I know you?" Thomas stepped closer. "Thomas Ashford. My father was John Ashford, owned the metalworks on Cornmill Lane." Recognition flickered in Webb's eyes, followed by wariness. "Ah, yes, I heard you'd returned. Bit of a surprise for everyone." "I'm sure," Thomas said. "I wanted to ask you about the sale of my factory. You signed the transfer papers in '43. Webb straightened, tried for dignity. "That was a legitimate council transaction. Your wife was the legal owner after you were declared dead. She had every right to sell." "I wasn't declared dead," Thomas said. "I was missing. There's a difference." Webb shifted his weight. "Legally, after 3 years, missing is presumed dead. The sale was above board." "And the £200 Bernard Watts paid you?" Thomas asked. "Was that above board, too?" Webb's face flushed. "I don't know what you're talking about. That's slander." "Is it?" Thomas stepped closer. Webb backed against the chapel wall. "I think you took a bribe. I think you pushed the sale through fast because Watts paid you to. I think you're a corrupt old man who sold out a soldier's inheritance for a few quid." "You've no proof," Webb said, voice shaking. "No proof at all. Now get out of my way before I call the police." Thomas smiled, cold and empty. "Call them. See if they care." Webb tried to push past Frank Collier. Collier portray his opportunistic nature, gradually revealing his cowardice through increasingly fearful tones and sounds. Release tension gradually. Process what happened. Emotional aftermath. Quieter, more reflective delivery. Slower pace, allowing space for emotional processing. For action scenes, increase the pacing and energy of the delivery. Use sharper inflections and more dynamic vocal variations to convey the excitement and intensity of the events. Use shouting sparingly to emphasize moments of extreme exertion or danger. Webb tried to push past. Thomas grabbed his walking stick, wrenched it out of his hand. Webb stumbled, fell against the wall. "Please, I'm an old man. I've done nothing to you." "You've done everything," Thomas said. He raised the walking stick. Webb threw up his hands. "No, please, I'll make it right. I'll get you money. I'll help you get the factory back. Please." Thomas brought the stick down once, hard, across Webb's skull. The old man crumpled. Thomas hit him again and again, until the stick cracked and Webb lay still, blood pooling on the cobbles. Thomas dropped the broken stick, walked out of the alley, wiped his hands on his coat. He felt nothing, just the tick of that internal clock, counting down. Arthur Webb's body was found the next morning by a milkman making deliveries. The police came, Morris and a detective this time, a thin man with sharp eyes named Inspector Davies. Davies examined the scene carefully, took photographs, collected the broken walking stick. "Robbery?" Morris suggested. Davies shook his head. "Wallet's still here. Watch, too." This was personal. He stood, looked around the alley. 3 deaths in 2 weeks. Watts, Collier, now Webb. All connected to that area. All working class or lower middle. Something's going on. Morris shrugged. "Could be coincidence, sir. Accidents happen." Davies looked at him. 3 accidents in 2 weeks? Come on, Constable." "With respect, sir," Morris said carefully, "the chief constables made it clear we're not to waste resources on people who don't matter much. These aren't businessmen or gentry. They're nobody important." Davies' jaw tightened. "Everybody's important, Constable." "Maybe where you're from, sir," Morris said. "But round here, the police don't care about the lower classes. Never have. And the people know it. That's why nobody talks." Davies stared at Webb's body, at the blood drying on the cobbles, at the broken walking stick. "Somebody's killing these men, and I'm going to find out who." Inspector Edward Davies had been in Yorkshire for 3 months and already understood one thing very clearly. The rules here were not the same in London. On paper, procedure was procedure. In reality, there were 2 sets of lives the police cared about. Those that made the headlines, and those that ended in alleys and canals without causing much fuss. Davies stood by the canal lock where Frank Collier's body had been dragged out days earlier. The water moved slow and dark, bits of rubbish turning lazy circles on the surface. Constable Morris shifted beside him, blowing into his hands against the cold. "You really think this one links to the others, sir? Watts dies in a cellar he knows like the back of his hand. Collier drowns on a route he's walked for years. Now Counselor Webb gets his skull broken in an alley on his way home from the club. All within a fortnight. All connected to the same factory sale." He looked at Morris. "You don't need Scotland Yard to see a pattern." Morris stared at the water. "Round here, sir, patterns only matter if they lead up, not down. Chief Constable says we've bigger priorities." "Does he now?" Davies murmured. He watched a leaf snag against the lock gate, tremble, then slip under. "What did Watts do before the war?" "Engineering," Morris said. "Took over Ashford Metalworks in '43. Good earner for him during the war, so I heard. Government contracts, parts for vehicles and such." "And Collier?" "Loom operator, worked at Hunslet Mill, lived with the widow. Margaret Ashford, that was." Morris glanced at Davies. "Husband was missing in action. POW, I heard someone say. Then turned up alive last month. Bit of a stir." Davies turned fully. "Name?" "Thomas Ashford." Davies let the name settle. Ashford, original owner of the factory Bernard Watts bought. Husband of the woman Collier was living with, and Webb signed off on the sale. He nodded once. "Thank you, Constable. That's the first useful thing anyone's told me all week." Morris bristled. "With respect, sir, folk don't talk to coppers here, not about their own, especially not when they think we don't give a toss." "And do we?" Davies asked quietly. Morris hesitated. "I do what I'm told, sir." "That wasn't the question," Davies said. He looked back at the canal. "Get me the full file on Ashford, service record if we can, PO details, and I want statements from anyone who saw him after he came back. Chief Constable won't like you digging, sir." Davies smiled without humor. "The Chief Constable doesn't need to know every detail of my daily schedule, does he, Constable?" Morris sighed. "Very good, sir." That evening, Davies walked down Domestic Street alone, collar turned up against the drizzle. Lamps glowed behind thin curtains. Women's voices drifted out. Kettles whistled. The smell of boiled cabbage and coal smoke hung in the air. He stopped outside number 17. The blue paint on the door was flaking, but the brass knocker shone. Someone kept it polished. He knocked. After a moment, the door opened a crack. Margaret Ashford, Collier now, in practice if not in law, looked out, eyes red-rimmed. "If you're from the council, I told them I'll pay the arrears next month." "I'm not from the council," Davies said gently. "CID, Inspector Davies. May I come in for a moment, Mrs. Ashford?" She hesitated, then opened the door wider. The hallway was narrow, the wallpaper yellowed with age. A photo of a young couple on their wedding day hung slightly crooked. Margaret in white, a tall young man beside her in uniform. Thomas. Davies noted it, stepped into the front room. "Tea?" she asked, rubbing her hands on her skirt. "No, thank you," Davies said. "I won't keep you long. I'm sorry for your loss." Her mouth trembled. "They say he fell, Frank, into the canal like some drunk." She looked at Davies, a flash of anger pushing through the grief. "He wasn't a drunk. He had a pint, maybe two, but he weren't one of those." "Did he have enemies?" Davies asked. "Anyone who'd wish him harm?" She laughed bitterly. "Besides half the street, you mean. They all thought he was a coward for not going. Reserved occupation, they called it. Munitions, my arse, I heard more than once." "And your husband?" Davies fed. "Thomas?" The laughter died. "He's not my husband anymore." "He is in law." "In law he was dead," she snapped. Then deflated. "Sorry, I'm tired." "Did he and Collier argue?" Davies asked. "After he came back?" "They had words," she said quietly. "Frank wanted Thomas gone. Thomas wanted Frank gone. You don't need to be a detective to work that out." "Did Thomas ever threaten him?" She stared at the worn rug. He said something. In the park. After Frank. she swallowed. "I asked him straight, 'Did you kill him?' And he said, 'If I did, would the police care?'" Davies's gaze sharpened. "Those exact words?" She nodded. "More or less. Then he said, 'The law doesn't care about men like him, about any of us.' He's not wrong, is he?" Davies thought of the chief constable's shrug, of the words, "nobody important." "He might not be," he said. "Where is he, Mrs. Ashford?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "You're the detective. You tell me." When Davies left the house, the rain had stopped, but the cobbles still shined wet under the lamps. He lit a cigarette, stood in the street, thinking of 3 dead men and the 4th who'd walked back from a war to find his life sold off piece by piece. He understood rage. He did not excuse it, but he understood it. Back at the station, he laid the files out on his desk. Watts, Collier, Webb, Ashford. Each connected by ink and signatures, by deals made in cozy offices while men froze in foreign fields. He could already hear the chief constable's voice when the request for further resources crossed his desk. "Let it go, Davies. These people, they sort themselves out, behind closed doors. No need to stir the muck." Davies stubbed out his cigarette. "We'll see," he said softly to the empty room. The children were the first to find them. It was late March, the last of the frost clinging to the edges of puddles on the moor. 3 boys from the estate had gone exploring beyond the railway line, chasing the thrill of places they'd been told to avoid. The old coal shaft loomed out of the heather, a black wound in the earth, fenced off with rusting iron rails and a sagging sign that read, "Danger, keep out." "Bet you won't go closer," one of them jeered, a skinny lad with scabbed knees. "Bet I will," said the smallest, climbing through a gap in the fence. He edged forward, stones crunching under his boots, peered down into the darkness. "Smells funny," he muttered. "What, scared of a smell now?" the tall one scoffed, following. He sniffed. It did smell. Sickly sweet. Wrong. He took another step, looked down properly. For a moment, his mind refused to make sense of the shapes below. Then it clicked. Faces. Or what was left of them. He screamed. By the time the first patrol car arrived, the boys were huddled together by the fence, white as chalk, refusing to look back at the shaft. Davies crouched beside them. "You did well coming straight here," he said. "You didn't throw stones? Didn't climb down?" They shook their heads in unison. "We ain't stupid," the smallest muttered, though his teeth were chattering. Davies walked to the edge, hand over his mouth. The stench rolled up like something alive. He forced himself to look. 4 bodies, maybe more. The fall breaking limbs at unnatural angles. 1 woman, 3 men. All dumped like rubbish in the darkness, where for once the earth had spat them back up. "Christ," Morris whispered beside him. "It's a bloody grave." "Get the rope team," Davies said, "and a photographer. No one goes down till they are here." It took hours to bring them up. The woman came first, her dress torn, hair matted with blood. Her face was swollen, but Davies saw enough to know. Margaret Ashford. He closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them again. Next came a man in a cheap suit, known locally as a bookie who worked back rooms and alleyways. The third was an older man Davies recognized from the Constitutional Club, a small-time accountant who'd handled cash jobs during the war. The fourth, younger, had the rough hands of a laborer. "What ties them together?" Morris asked, voice hushed. Not sure yet, Davies said, but I'd wager they were all standing in someone's way. Same someone? Morris said. Davies looked at Margaret's ruined face. He thought of her in the front room, twisting her handkerchief, saying, "He's not wrong, is he?" "Yes," Davies said, "I think so." Back at the station, the chief constable read the preliminary report, then set it down as if it smelled as bad as the mine shaft. "So, we've got bodies in a pit up on the moor? Nasty business, but these things happen. Old shafts, kids, drunks, lovers' quarrels, you know the drill." "With respect, sir," Davies said, "they didn't all fall down there on their own. They were dumped. Some after death. Some, I suspect, while still alive." The chief constable lit a cigarette, took his time with the first drag. "And why exactly are you bringing this to me as if it were the bloody Brinks mat robbery?" "Because it's a pattern," Davies said evenly. "Watts in the cellar, Collier in the canal, Webb in the alley. Now 4 more in a shaft, all within walking distance of Cornmill Lane, all with some link to the redistribution of 1 factory and 1 woman's life. A woman who, I might remind you, took up with another man before her husband was officially confirmed dead. Not exactly a paragon of virtue. She ended up in a pit," Davies said. "Whatever you think of her morals, she didn't put herself there." The chief waved that away. "Look, Davies, the Home Office is on my back about robberies in the suburbs, car thefts, a couple of assaults up Chapeltown way. People that matter are concerned. Councillors' wives getting their handbags snatched. You understand?" "I do, sir," Davies said. "But if we let this go, what message does that send?" "The same message we've always sent," the chief said calmly. "That the lower classes sort their own, behind closed doors, on waste ground, in abandoned pits. They're used to it. It's how it's always been. We turn up, we write our notes, we file it away. End of." Davies held his gaze. "Somebody is using that attitude as cover. Someone who knows nobody will look too closely if the victims are from estates and back streets." The chief's eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing me of negligence, Inspector?" "I'm saying someone is counting on our negligence," Davies said. "And I won't be part of that." A long pause. Then the chief picked up the report again, flicked through it, and dropped it back on the desk. "You have 48 hours, Davies. No extra men, no overtime. You want to knock on doors and talk to people who don't want to talk to you, do it on your own time. After that, we close the book unless something drops into our lap. Clear?" "Crystal, sir," Davies said. Outside, on the station steps, Morris fell into step beside him. 48 hours, sir? That's nothing." "It's something," Davies said. "Start with the estate near the shaft. Quiet houses, loud mouths. Somebody saw something. They always do." "And if they don't talk?" Morris asked. Davies looked up at the gray Yorkshire sky, low and heavy. "Then I find the one person angry enough to break the silence." He found him back where it started, at the factory. The yard was quiet, machines stilled for the night. A light burned in the old office, the glass cracked from some long-ago impact. Davies pushed the gate. It creaked in protest. He walked across the oil-stained concrete, climbed the steps to the office door, and paused. "Come in, Inspector," Thomas Ashford's voice called from inside. "No point sneaking when I've been waiting for you." Davies opened the door. Thomas sat at the desk that had once been his father's, sleeves rolled up, hands clasped. The room smelled of old paper and machine oil. On the wall hung a faded calendar from 1939, never turned. Thomas glanced at it, then at Davies. "Last year things made sense," he said. "Or so we thought." "Mr. Ashford," Davies said, "we need to talk." "I imagine we do," Thomas said. He nodded to the chair opposite. "Sit down. I've put the kettle on, but I doubt you drink tea with murderers." "Do you call yourself that?" Davies asked, not sitting. Thomas tilted his head. "What do you call me, Inspector?" Davies stayed standing. "I call you a man with motive and opportunity. Watts, Collier, Webb, then the four in the shaft. All connected, directly or indirectly, to you, to your factory, to your wife." "Ex-wife," Thomas said softly. His gaze flicked to the window, out to the dark yard. "She's in that shaft, isn't she?" "You know she is," Davies said. Thomas's jaw tightened. "When they sent that telegram calling me missing, she wore black for a year." "Did she tell you that?" "She told me she mourned," Davies said. "She also told me you said the law doesn't care about men like you." "It doesn't," Thomas said simply. "It cares about headlines, about middle-class women afraid to walk home from the cinema, about counselors with their pockets lined by men like Watts, men like Webb." "You killed them," Davies said. "Say it." Thomas looked at him, then smiled faintly. "You want me to confess? Here, without a solicitor, without a statement-taking clerk?" "I want the truth," Davies said. "Off the record, if that's what it takes." Thomas leaned back. "Truth is a luxury for men who didn't eat rats to stay alive. But I'll give you this much. When I came back, I found a ghost of a life. My house taken. My wife in another man's bed. My factory in another man's hands. Everyone had a reason. Everyone had paperwork. Everyone had survival to justify their choices. Nobody had shame." "That doesn't give you the right to kill them," Davies said. "Does it give them the right to live happy on what was mine?" Thomas asked quietly. "Watts made a fortune on contracts that should have been my father's legacy. Frank warmed my bed while I was counting lice on a straw mattress. Webb took his cut and signed it all off. The others, they were flies on the carcass. Men who made their money off rationing, off side deals, off the black market that bloomed while we froze." "You threw your own wife down a shaft," Davies said. "You tell yourself she was just another fly?" Thomas's eyes flickered. For the first time, something cracked. "Maggie." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't plan that, not at first. I only went to talk, to ask her why she didn't wait, why she didn't fight for the factory, for my father's name. And she said she had to survive," Thomas said. "Said no one was coming to save her. Said the bank didn't care I was missing, the council didn't care, the police didn't care." She was right. But then she said something else. "What?" She said, "Maybe it was better I died over there," he said. That the man who came back wasn't the man she'd married. That if she'd known what I'd be like, she'd have prayed for that telegram to say killed in action instead of missing. Davies was silent. Outside, a metal sheet rattled in the wind. "We argued," Thomas said. Words turned to shouting. She slapped me. I grabbed her arms. She pulled away, stumbled, hit her head on the table edge, just like Watts on the cellar step. The sound, he closed his eyes briefly. She went down, didn't move. "You could have called an ambulance?" Davies said. "And said what? Hello, I accidentally killed my wife who's been living in sin with a man I probably drowned?" You know how that would have gone. You exactly what the chief constable would have written on his report. Domestic tragedy, lower-class household, unfortunate but not unexpected. So you made her another piece of your pattern, Davies said. I carried her out, Thomas said. No one saw. People don't look when it's late and they're tired. Took her up to the shaft where I'd left the others. Dropped her in. The earth doesn't judge, Inspector. It just takes what it's given. Davies finally sat, the chair creaking. You've just confessed to at least 3 murders and 1 unlawful killing. I've confirmed what you already knew, Thomas said. The rest you can fill in on your forms. You'll get your conviction. They'll hang me at Armley Gale if you push hard enough. Another tidy rope around a messy story. You think that's all this is? Paperwork? Davies asked. What else has it ever been? Thomas said. We went to war because paperwork said so. We starved because paperwork said supplies couldn't reach us. We came home to find our lives redistributed because paperwork said presumed dead instead of missing. Men like Webb signed it. Men like Watts paid for it. Men like your chief constable said, not our problem, whenever the poor started bleeding. And your answer was to become judge, jury, executioner? Davies said. No, Thomas said. My answer was to become what the war made me. Efficient, thorough, detached. Out there, if a man stole bread from the camp kitchen, he got beaten. If a guard shot a prisoner for looking at him the wrong way, there was nothing we could do. Here, for the first time in years, I could act. Davies studied him. You know what they'll say, don't you, in the papers? Demobbed soldier snaps, post-war trauma, tragic but understandable. They'll write about your service, about your suffering. They'll wring their hands about men coming back damaged. Thomas shrugged. Let them. They weren't in the stalag. You're giving me nothing to like about you, Davies said. But I still don't want to see you hang as some kind of symbol while everyone who helped create this mess walks away clean. Thomas gave a dry laugh. You going to lose sleep over me, Inspector? I already have, Davies said. Over Watts and Collier and Webb. Over your wife in that shaft. Over the kids who found them and will never forget the smell. They sat in silence for a moment. In the yard, a train horn sounded in the distance. You have 2 options, Davies said finally. You come with me now, give a full statement, face trial. Or you run. I'll still write my report. I'll still name you. But if you vanish into some other city, some other life, the chances of them dragging you back in front of a judge are slim. They don't chase men like you very far. Not when there are handbags being snatched in Roundhay. Thomas considered that. You'd let me walk? I can't let you, Davies said. But I also can't stop you if you decide to stand up and leave while I'm looking for my notebook. Thomas's eyes searched his face. Why? Because hanging you doesn't fix what got you there, Davies said. It doesn't change a system that writes off half a city as acceptable collateral. It just gives them a neat ending. And this is not Nate. Thomas stood slowly. You know they'll say you botched it, lost your man. They'll send you back to London with a black mark on your record. Wouldn't be the first, Davies said. They looked at each other across the desk. Then Thomas nodded once, a soldier acknowledging another. You know what the worst part is, Inspector? He said. What? If someone like you had given a damn 5 years ago, Maggie might have waited. Watts might have thought twice. Webb might have been too scared to take his envelope. But no one did. Not till bodies started stinking up the moor. Davies didn't argue. There was nothing to say. Thomas picked up his father's watch from the desk, fastened it around his wrist. My train leaves in 20 minutes. North, I think. There's work in shipyards, I heard. Places where no one asks too many questions. Davies stood too. You realize I'll put your name in every report, every circular. If they catch you, I won't lie for you. I wouldn't ask you to, Thomas said. He walked to the door, paused. Tell Morris to stop shrugging, Inspector. Tell him the lower classes see everything, and some of us keep score. Then he stepped out into the night. Davies stayed in the office for a full 5 minutes. Just enough time for a man to walk to the station and buy a ticket without hurrying. Then he left, went back to the station, sat at his desk, and began to write. He wrote about a city that let certain deaths slide. About a chief constable who measured human worth in newspaper columns. About an ex-soldier who came home to find his life looted and chose the only justice he believed was left. He didn't excuse, he didn't soften, he just told it as it was. The report went up the chain. Some parts were quietly removed. Others were filed and forgotten. Thomas Ashford's name went on a circular that no one outside Yorkshire ever read. No patrolman in Glasgow or Newcastle ever matched the quiet man on a shipyard gate to the wanted notice for murders in Leeds. Years later, when Davies had a few more gray hairs and a lot less faith in the system, he would catch sight of a news item about an accident in a northern yard. A worker killed, stopping a runaway crane from crushing 3 younger men. The name was wrong, the details were thin, but the description, tall, reserved, kept to himself, quiet man, worked hard, didn't talk much about the war, made something twist in his chest. He folded the paper, stared out at the drizzle beyond his office window, and thought of a factory in Holbeck, a shaft on the moor, and a man who'd walked away when given the chance. Did Thomas get the justice he wanted? No. Did the people he killed deserve better than a shaft and a line in a coroner's ledger? Yes. Did the police ever really care about the lower classes the way they did about the people in big houses with tidy gardens? Behind closed doors, in streets like Domestic Street and estates on the edge of the moor, everyone knew the answer.